Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Hello everybody, and welcome to this review video where we take a look at Grimdark Future Warfleets. You know, it still surprises me that the most viewed video on the entire channel is the one where I go over the changes for OnePageRules 3rd edition. So when I saw the new edition of Warfleets dropped, I figured this is what folks are interested in, so I decided to make a summary of the changes to Warfleets here too. So we're going to dive in, take a look at what we got, and see just how different the new edition is in comparison to what we had in 1.8. So the first big change, while not affecting the rules at all, is that the name has been changed. It used to be called Warfleets FTL, or Warfleets Faster Than Light, and now it's officially been merged with the Grimdark Future universe, so now it's Grimdark Future Warfleets. One of the big changes, which does affect the rules, is that now there are 17 factions to play for one of each of the 17 factions in Grimdark Future, and each one is going to have their own unique rules and play styles, so now the game is going to be as varied as Grimdark Future is, and I think that's pretty awesome. On the downside, OnePageRules stated in their announcement that they currently have no plans on releasing any new STL files. So we still just have the 7 faction files that are already published on My Mini Factory. Now they have provided a guide saying, you know, if you're going to play the Jackals, we recommend using these files, or if you're going to play the Robot Legions, we recommend these files. But that means now we have 7 sets of models for 17 factions. So honestly, that's kind of a bit meh. I was really hoping the announcement would say something like, we're working through our STL files for Grimdark Future and Age of Fantasy, and when we finish with those, we'll turn to Warfleets. But the announcement says, quote, no prospects of releasing new ships at this time. Now, I know that's not a huge deal. The game is model agnostic. You can use whatever models you want. If you have old Battlefleet Gothic models, you can use those. If you're a player of Star Wars Armada or X-Wing, you can use those. It doesn't really matter. It's more just my OCD that I like knowing that each army has its own dedicated set of models that if I don't want to use, I can at least use as a guideline or as kind of a framework to bring in my own stuff. The idea of having this one set of models represents 4 potential factions just doesn't sit as well with me. But again, I'm super OCD about that kind of stuff. Obviously, that's not the same as everybody else. So, in addition to the new name, we also have new art for the rulebook. It's pretty similar to the previous one. I'd say it's a bit more intense, but it's updated. It looks good. It's a visual representation that we have shifted to a new edition, so that's pretty good. Now, model scales, basing recommendations, the stat line categories, all that stuff hasn't changed. So what we'll do now is go through the specific changes for each section of the game. So first, in the preparation section, it's had some clarification about the board size. They recommend a 6x4 table, but point out that as long as you have 24 inches between no man's land, you can play on smaller tables. They also added a bit of clarification to placing terrain. For example, they've said don't put objectives inside impassable terrain where ships can never reach it. Now, to me, that seems like pretty obvious. You shouldn't have to specify that. But one thing I've learned is when you look at a warning label that says, do not use this product while standing in a bucket of water outside in a thunderstorm, it's because somebody actually did it. And now the company has to cover their backside. So don't put your objectives in unreachable places. Moving on. The fleet sizes have also had a bit of a clarification. So previously it was recommended that 300 points was a good starting place for learning games, but they never specified what a quote-unquote full-size game was. The new book states that 450 points is the point size for a standard game. So they are giving you that. Obviously, you can go as many points as you want if you want to play some kind of really epic battle, but they have now specified 300 for a beginner game, 450 for a standard game. Moving on to the force organization. This is a new section. The old book stated no restrictions except for 2. That is, 1, a limit of 1 hero for every 300 points, and the number of squadrons you had couldn't exceed the number of upgrades across all other ships in the fleet. The new book has a slightly more complete force organization chart, which, while optional, makes the game a little bit more balanced and more structured. And overall, it's not that strict. It has 4 limitations. First, you can have one hero per 200 points instead of per 300, so we'll be seeing more characters and specialist ships. You can have one copy of the same unit for every 150 points. There's one ship per 50 points and one squadron per 35 points. I think what they're looking for is avoiding the spamming of the tiniest ships and just overwhelming in numbers, because as we've seen in one-page rules, there is an advantage to having a sheer weight of numbers. So they're trying to trim that down a little bit. Now, there have been no changes to deployment, to the entire playing the game page. Nothing's changed in movement, nothing's changed in shooting, and nothing has been changed in the sections that used to cover ramming and morale. All of that is still word for word what the old rulebook said. Now, if we move on to terrain, we have had one small but very significant change. The change in the rule for cover that we saw in Grimdark Future and Age of Fantasy has now been applied to Warfleets as well. Cover no longer grants the -1 to hit bonus, but instead +1 to ship toughness. Under special rules, they've made some significant changes here. So first, anti-ship weapons now get +1 to hit against ships, but only hit squadrons on a 6+. And anti-squadron flips that. Likewise, it keeps the benefit from the previous edition, but adds a penalty for hitting ships. So if you have an anti-squadron gun, it is +1 against squadrons, but now it only hits ships on a 6+. And that's a good change, I think, because if you take a gun that's already good and then give it something that makes it even better, there's a temptation to want to spam that on all of your ships. Whereas now, if you take a ship that's specialist against blowing up other ships, but at a penalty of sucking against squadrons, that makes you have to really consider the choice before you take it. Now, there is a new rule for weapons, the boarding pod. Now, this can only target ships, and each time it's successful, instead of automatically causing damage, the controlling player has to add a boarding marker to its ship. And each time he activates that ship, the controlling player rolls 1 dice for each boarding marker. On a 4+, the boarding token is removed. On a 1 through 3, the ship takes 1 damage. So you can really start to stack, and over time it can chip away. I think it's a kind of cool way of simulating that there's fighting and combat going on inside the ship while the rest of the battle is still going on. The next big change has been to Broadside Rules. It still limits to only guns that are mounted on the sides of ships, makes sense. The old rule used to provide double the number of attacks. The new rule allows you to fire out both sides on the same activation. So instead of concentrating on one ship now, you can sail in between two and fire at them both. Instead of shooting twice at one ship, you can shoot once at 2 ships. The next rule has just gotten a new name. What used to be called Relentless is now called Twinfire. So the specific details about declaring both shots before firing has been removed, but the rule states that you shoot at 2 different targets at the same time. So same idea, just different wording. Next rule is the Sniper rule. This one allows the attacker to choose which specific upgrade gets the damage instead of the defender, so that's an interesting change. The next interesting change is in the section about taking heroes and upgrading your captains with titles. It's pretty much the same, though in the old book there was a line that said each hero may only be taken once per fleet. That's gone. Now, it's perhaps that some of the other rules that are in the book will counterbalance that, but there's no longer specifically a rule saying you can only take one type of hero for each fleet. The next thing that has some significant changes is where it talks about common ships and squadrons. That is, the ships and squadrons that anybody can purchase regardless of faction. Ships have been given a name now in addition to weight classes, and the number of upgrades is listed as a part of the weight class instead of as a stat for each weight class. Now, that could seem just mostly a cosmetic difference, and it kind of is. But instead of just having heavy ships, medium ships, and light ships, now you have cruisers are the new heavy, destroyers are the new medium, and corvettes are the new light. Gives a little bit of extra fluff. It sounds better than just classifying everything by its weight, although if you look in the rulebook after each of those official ship types or classes, it still lists heavy, medium, and light and has the appropriate number for the upgrades for that particular ship. That hasn't changed. It's simply a rebranding to make it a little more spicy. Now, if we move on to some of the changes to common heroes, The Expert Sapper hero upgrade has been given a tiny increase to the range of the mines that it drops. Previously, a mine that was dropped had a threat range of 2 inches. That has been increased to 3. The Ace Commander hero has been removed, at least from the list of common heroes. There's probably a faction or two that has something similar, but it's gone. In its place is a new type of hero called the Ace Carrier. A ship can now hold as many squadrons as it has upgrades, and once per turn it can deploy all of them within 2 inches of the carrier and then immediately activate all of them. So that looks like your new Death Star. You pull up a ship with a heavy ship and then unload a whole bunch of bombers or other types of squadrons, and all of them get to activate right then and there. So that seems like a pretty interesting kind of change to the game. We'll be curious to see how that looks on the tabletop. Next we move on to titles. Now the names are the same but have had a points change and a rule change. The first title is Avenger, and it's the most expensive at 10 points. It allows the player a free D3 plus 1 inch movement at the start of its activation. So a little bit of extra movement. The next title is the Vanguard. It's only 5 points, and it has a once free move after deployment. And then the last title is the Defiant for another 5 points, which has pretty much the same rule as the previous edition. That is, when a friendly ship within 6 inches is destroyed, this ship may remove 2 damage. So some significant changes to the common titles. Moving on to the common upgrade section, armor plating has been reduced. It now absorbs only 4 damage instead of 5. One of the things that OnePageRules stated with this new edition is they wanted it to be more chaotic. They wanted it to be more destructive. They heard too much that after an entire game of Warfleets that maybe 1 or 2 ships had been removed. Whereas anyone who's played Grimdark Future or Age of Fantasy knows you're removing entire units after the first couple activations. So they're trying to lower resistance to damage in the new edition of Warfleets and increase damage output so that games get a little bit more, you mix it up a little bit more. So the game is a lot more faster, more destructive, so we're in line with that goal there. The next upgrade for Precision Rig has been renamed the Tracking Servo and moved to the bottom of the list to keep things alphabetical. The upgrade itself hasn't changed at all. Warp Drive has been removed, so no more moving through ships and other ships without any kind of penalty. You're going to have to navigate everything on the board. If we move to the next section of common weapons, the Heavy Cannon and the Tsunami Cannon have just been removed. Instead, there are 3 new weapon systems: the Pod Launcher, the Precision Cannon, and the Rapid Cannon. So one, of course, goes to providing your ship the ability to carry out those boarding actions. The next one is for that sniper rule. And then the Rapid Cannon is increasing firepower. All right, from there you have extra rules for terrain, deployment, extra missions, fog of war, and all of those other unique ways to add more flavor to your game. I'm not going to go into those in detail because those are things that are included in the advanced rulebook. Typically, to have access to those things, you've either purchased the full rulebook or you're a Patreon subscriber, and I don't want to be giving away for free changes and information and stuff that OPR does want people to pay for. But I will say, though, with all those additional rules and sections in the book, there is more than enough to justify a $5 investment in the full rulebook. There's all kinds of great stuff on adding some extra flavor to the game, mission changes, adding effects to terrain, all kinds of stuff like that. If you have purchased or gotten your hands on a full copy of either the Grimdark Future or the Age of Fantasy rulebook, you know exactly what sections are going to be in there and a pretty good idea of how much extra depth it's going to add to the game. So if you're interested in taking a look at those sections, you can head on over to Drive-Thru RPG. That's where OnePageRules sells its full rule books. So there you have it, new rules for a new game. I'm definitely excited to give this game a try. I have some plans to get a game or two filmed and up on the channel at some point in the future. However, the unfortunate thing is on Black Friday, I bought a space mat specifically to use for Warfleets games, and when it arrived, there was a major printing error with it, and I had to send it back. And with the Christmas season, it's going to take a long time to mail that thing back, and get the replacement back to me. So unfortunately, I might not be able to record those games probably until the new year, and then it'll be a few weeks before they update onto the channel itself. But just keep in mind, there are some in the pipeline, there are some in the works. So that's it for this video. I hope you guys thought that it was good enough.